Have you ever felt that something is repeating in your life? It's as if certain situations, people, and even emotions keep coming back, just in different forms. The faces change, the context shifts, yet the feeling at the end is strangely familiar. And at some point you stop questioning it. You call it coincidence, personality, fate. But stay with this for a moment. When something repeats often enough, it usually isn't random. It follows a structure, a rhythm, a pattern that operates quietly beneath the surface of your daily choices and reactions. Most of the time, you don't see it because you're already inside it. You think you are responding to what is happening now, but the speed of your reaction tells another story. The emotion arrives before the explanation. The explanation feels automatic, and suddenly you're living the same experience again, convinced it's new. This isn't about fixing yourself or blaming the past. It's about noticing something simple and precise, because when you begin to see what is actually repeating, you start to realize that reality may not be looping on its own. It may be responding to something much closer than you ever imagined. You may believe that what you are living right now is being created in this very moment, that today's choices, reactions, and feelings are fresh responses to what is happening in front of you. But if you slow down and look carefully, something uncomfortable begins to appear. Most of what you call now was already decided long before this moment arrived. The way you respond to a message, a tone of voice, a delay, a look, or a disappointment often happens faster than thought. Before you can choose, you are already inside the reaction. Words come out that feel familiar. Emotions rise that feel old. Decisions are made that feel inevitable. This is not because the present is powerful. It is because the present is being filtered through patterns that were formed when you were not paying attention. Your nervous system learned very early how to survive, how to belong, how to avoid pain, how to seek approval, how to protect itself. It recorded emotional shortcuts. It learned what to expect and what to fear. And once something is learned deeply enough, it no longer feels like a memory. It feels like reality itself. So when you think you are reacting to what someone just did, you're often responding to something much older. A familiar sensation in the body appears, and the mind immediately fills in the meaning. This always happens. I knew this would go wrong. Here we go again. The present becomes a stage where old scripts are replayed with new actors. This is why change feels so difficult. Not because life resists you, but because the system inside you is designed to repeat what is known. Known does not mean good. Known means predictable. And predictability feels safer than the unknown even when it hurts. You might tell yourself you are choosing freely. But watch closely how many of your choices are reactions rather than responses. How often do you pause before speaking? How often do you feel the emotion fully before acting on it? How often do you question the story that appears in your mind? When there is no pause, there is no present. There is only momentum. This momentum gives the illusion that life is happening to you. But in truth, life is echoing you. The same inner posture generates the same outer experiences, just rearranged. Different places, different people, same emotional ending. And because the surface details change, you believe something new is happening. Yet the feeling underneath is familiar. This is what it means when we say the present is not creating your reality. The past is quietly steering it through habits of attention, interpretation, and reaction. You wake up inside a pattern already in motion, and then you call the outcome fate, luck, or personality. There is nothing wrong with you for this. This is how the human system works, but there is something powerful hidden here. If the present is not the source, then force will never be the solution. Trying harder, controlling outcomes, or fixing external circumstances cannot touch what is actually generating the repetition. The moment you begin to see this, even faintly, a small crack appears. You realize that the problem is not what is happening, but how quickly meaning is assigned. How fast the mind says, "I know this." How quickly the body tightens, prepares, defends, or collapses. The repetition lives in that speed. This is also why waiting for life to change before you feel different never works. The feeling must interrupt the pattern first, but not by replacing it with positivity or effort, only by seeing it clearly, without immediately becoming it. Right now, as you read this, there may be a quiet recognition, not dramatic, not emotional, just a sense of truth, a sense that many moments in your life were not lived, but reenacted, and that what you call the present has been carrying the weight of the past without you noticing. This recognition does not require you to fix anything yet. It only asks you to notice where your attention goes automatically, because what you repeatedly attend to is what gains strength, definition, and authority in your experience. And until that is seen, reality will keep looking the same, even when everything on the surface changes. No one really explains this to you when you are growing up. Your attention is not neutral. It is not just a flashlight that shows what is already there. It is more like a sculptor's hand, quietly shaping what becomes solid in your experience. You assume the world is happening first and then you notice it, but most of the time the opposite is true. What you notice becomes your world. Think about how two people can live through the same day and describe completely different realities. One sees threat, disrespect, decline. The other sees opportunity, learning, possibility. They walk the same streets, talk to the same people, face the same facts. Yet their inner worlds are not even close. The difference is not intelligence or optimism. It is where attention habitually lands. Attention is selective by nature. At every moment there is far more information available than you could ever process. Sounds, sensations, micro-expressions, memories, expectations. The mind must choose what to highlight and what to ignore. And it makes those choices based on conditioning, not truth. If your attention has been trained by years of stress, it will scan for danger automatically. If it has been shaped by disappointment, it will look for signs of failure. If it has been shaped by emotional neglect, it will focus on absence rather than presence. Over time, these filters feel invisible. You forget they exist. You start to believe you are seeing reality directly. But you are not observing the world as it is. You are observing a narrow slice that confirms what you already expect. This is why attention is so powerful. Whatever it rests on begins to feel important, real, and personal. A passing thought becomes a belief if you keep looking at it. A small irritation becomes a defining problem if you return to it again and again. A fear becomes an identity if it receives enough mental energy. And here is the part almost no one tells you. Attention feeds emotion, and emotion feeds attention. They reinforce each other in a closed loop. You feel a subtle tension, so you look for a reason. You find one. The emotion grows stronger. Your attention narrows further. Soon the world appears to match the feeling perfectly. At that point it no longer feels like you are choosing where to focus. It feels like the world is demanding it, like something out there is pulling your awareness. But if you look closely, you will see that the pull is internal. It is familiarity calling itself truth. This is why trying to think positively often fails. You attempt to replace negative thoughts, but your attention is still trained to search for what is wrong. So even positivity becomes strained, artificial, and exhausting. The issue is not what you think, it is what you keep returning to without noticing. Attention also shapes time. When you are absorbed by worry, the future feels heavy and threatening. When attention is stuck in regret, the past feels alive and unresolved. Rarely does attention rest fully in what is happening now. And when it does not, the present feels thin, empty, or unreal. Yet the present is the only place where patterns can loosen. This does not require force. It begins with a simple but uncomfortable act, noticing where your attention goes on its own. Not where you want it to go, not where you think it should go, but where it actually goes when you are tired, triggered, or alone with your thoughts. You may discover that your attention returns to the same themes again and again, the same memories, the same imagined conversations, the same worries dressed in slightly different words, and you may notice how familiar emotions accompany them, like background music that never turns off. This is not a mistake. This is conditioning in action. When attention is unconscious, it strengthens the pattern it rests upon. When attention becomes conscious, something new appears, a small space, a fraction of a second, where you see the movement instead of being carried by it. That space is not dramatic, but it is decisive. Because in that space, the loop between attention and emotion begins to loosen. You start to see that what you focus on feels real, not because it is objectively dominant, but because it is repeatedly energized. And if something can be energized, it can also be starved, not by suppression or avoidance, but by not feeding it automatically. As this understanding deepens, another realization begins to form. If attention shapes what feels real, then much of what you call reality may be a reflection of emotional habits rather than objective facts. And if that is true, then the tension you feel in life may not come from circumstances alone, but from the invisible loop between how you feel and what you keep noticing without question. There is a loop operating quietly in your life, so familiar that you rarely question it. It feels natural, almost logical. An emotion appears, and you assume it is a response to what is happening around you. Something feels off, heavy, or tense, and the mind immediately looks outward for the cause. Someone said something wrong. Something didn't go as planned. The world, once again, is not cooperating. But if you slow this down, you begin to notice something subtle and important. The emotion often comes first. Before the explanation, before the story, before the conclusion, there is a sensation in the body, a tightening in the chest, a sinking in the stomach, a restlessness that has no clear object yet. The mind's job is to make sense of this sensation, so it scans the environment and the past for a reason. It finds one quickly, and once it does, the emotion feels justified. Now the loop is complete. You feel something. You interpret the world through that feeling. The interpretation confirms the emotion, and the emotion grows stronger. Each pass through the loop makes it feel more real, more personal, more true. After a while, you stop seeing it as a loop at all. You call it how things are. This is why certain emotions seem to follow you wherever you go. Not because life keeps recreating the same conditions, but because the same emotional lens is being carried into new situations. The lens shapes what stands out, what feels significant, what feels threatening or disappointing. Reality appears to cooperate perfectly with the emotion, even though it is being filtered by it. Take anxiety as an example. When it is present, neutral events feel loaded. Silence becomes danger. Uncertainty becomes a problem that must be solved immediately. The mind scans constantly, looking for confirmation that the feeling makes sense, and it always finds something, because attention is now working on behalf of the emotion. The same is true with sadness, anger, resentment, or even hope. Emotions are not passive experiences. They are organizing forces. They decide what matters, what gets remembered, what gets ignored. They shape the story of the day before the day is even over. The invisible part of this loop is that it feels objective. You don't say, I feel this way, therefore I see the world like this. You say, the world is like this, therefore I feel this way. The direction is reversed, and that reversal keeps the pattern intact. Over time, this loop becomes self-sustaining. You wake up already inside a mood, and the day unfolds to match it. Conversations seem to confirm it. News headlines reinforce it. Memories line up in support of it. By the end of the day, the emotion feels proven. You go to sleep believing you have seen the truth. This is not because you are wrong or broken. It is because the human system seeks coherence. It wants inner and outer to match. When an emotion is present, the mind works to bring the world into alignment with it. Consistency feels safer than contradiction. The cost of this is subtle, but deep. When the loop runs unchecked, emotions stop being information and start being identity. You don't just feel anxious. You are an anxious person in an anxious world. You don't just feel disappointed. You live in a disappointing reality. The line between inner state and external facts dissolves, and the more you believe the world is the cause, the more power the loop gains. You try to fix circumstances, change people, control outcomes. Sometimes it works briefly, but the emotion returns because it was never dependent on those things in the first place. What begins to weaken the loop is not suppression or analysis. It is noticing the order of events. Feeling first, story second, confirmation last. When this order becomes visible, something shifts. You may still feel the emotion, but it no longer has absolute authority. You begin to sense that what feels true may be familiar rather than accurate, that the world you are reacting to may be a mirror polished by the emotion itself. This does not mean emotions are wrong or should be eliminated. They are signals, but a signal is not the landscape. When you mistake one for the other, you live inside a closed circuit where every feeling proves itself endlessly. As awareness grows, another question starts to form quietly in the background. If emotions are shaping what feels real, then what happens when you stop automatically believing and acting on them? What happens in the moment when a feeling arises, but you do not immediately move with it, explain it, or push it away? What you experience as the world feels solid, external, and independent of you. It seems obvious that you are looking outward, taking in what is happening, and responding to it. But if you stay with this inquiry a little longer, something quietly unsettling begins to emerge. You are not meeting reality directly. You are meeting a reflection shaped by your inner state. Between what happens and what you experience, there is a lens. This lens is made of memories, emotional habits, beliefs, expectations, and unexamined conclusions. It operates instantly and silently. You don't notice it working because it has been there for so long. It feels like vision itself. When two people witness the same event and walk away with completely different impressions, this lens is the reason. One feels attacked, the other feels challenged. One feels rejected, the other feels neutral. The event did not change. The internal filter did. This is not a philosophical idea. It is a lived moment-to-moment process. Every sound, word, and expression passes through an internal system that assigns meaning before you are aware of it. By the time you see reality, it has already been interpreted. The mind is especially skilled at filling in gaps. It completes stories without asking permission. A pause in conversation becomes disinterest. A short reply becomes disrespect. A delay becomes a sign of rejection. None of these are facts. They are reflections of inner expectations projected outward. Because this happens so fast, you rarely question it. You trust what you perceive because it feels immediate and personal. Yet what feels immediate is often recycled. The same conclusions appear in different situations, as if life itself is repeating themes. In truth, the lens is repeating them. This is why changing circumstances often brings only temporary relief. You change jobs, relationships, environments, or routines, expecting a new experience. For a while, it feels different. Then familiar frustrations return, not because the new situation is the same, but because the way it is being perceived has not changed. The internal reflection also shapes what you do not see. Opportunities can pass unnoticed. Support can be overlooked. Neutral moments can be interpreted as negative. The world becomes narrower, not because it is limited, but because the lens is selective. This selectivity creates a powerful illusion. That reality is confirming your inner story. If you believe people cannot be trusted, your attention will highlight every inconsistency. If you believe you are undervalued, your mind will collect evidence relentlessly. Over time, the reflection looks so consistent that it feels like proof. Yet what is being confirmed is not the world but the filter. This does not mean you are imagining everything or denying objective facts. It means that facts are always wrapped in interpretation. The emotional tone, the meaning, the personal relevance are added internally. And once added, they feel inseparable from what happened. The most challenging part of seeing this is emotional, not intellectual. There can be resistance. If what you perceive is a reflection, then certainty begins to wobble. The ground you thought you were standing on feels less solid. The mind prefers clarity, even painful clarity, over ambiguity. But within this discomfort, something important becomes possible. If perception is shaped internally, then reality is not fixed in the way you thought. It is responsive, not to control or force, but to the state of the observer. This does not require you to adopt new beliefs. It asks you to notice the tone of your seeing, the emotional flavor that colors your interpretations, the assumptions that arrive without being questioned. When you start to notice the lens, instead of only what appears through it, distance emerges. You begin to see that reactions are not commands, that interpretations are not facts, that what feels personal may be habitual. In this space, even briefly, you are no longer completely inside the reflection. You are aware of it, and awareness changes the relationship. This awareness does not immediately dissolve the lens, but it weakens its grip. The reflection loses some of its authority. You begin to sense that the struggle to change the world may be misplaced, that the tension you feel may not come from what is happening, but from how tightly you are identified with what you think you are seeing. As this understanding settles, another pattern becomes visible: the constant effort to adjust, correct, or battle external circumstances. The urge to fix what appears out there, without recognizing that the trigger may be operating much closer than you thought. Once it feels clear that life is not unfolding the way you want, a natural impulse takes over. You try to fix what is outside of you. You adjust your behavior, your words, your plans. You try to manage people's reactions, improve circumstances, remove obstacles. It feels practical. It feels responsible. It feels like the only option. And yet, despite all this effort, the same frustrations keep returning. This is the mistake almost everyone makes, without realizing it. You fight the external world as if it were the source of the problem, while the pattern that generates your experience remains untouched. When something feels wrong inside, the mind looks for something to change outside. If you feel disrespected, you want others to behave differently. If you feel anxious, you want certainty and control. If you feel empty, you look for stimulation, success, or recognition. These strategies are not wrong. They are human, but they often miss the real trigger. The external world becomes a screen onto which internal tension is projected. You argue with situations, negotiate with people, and resist outcomes, believing that relief will come once the environment finally aligns with your expectations. Sometimes it does, briefly, and the relief feels like proof that you were right, but then the tension returns, often in a different form. This happens because the internal posture has not changed. The same emotional stance is still operating, scanning for threats, deficiencies, or validation. So even when one problem is solved, another appears. The fight continues, and it feels endless. Fighting the external also strengthens identification. You define yourself in opposition to what you resist. You become someone who is battling circumstances, correcting others, or holding things together. This can even become a source of identity and meaning. Struggle feels familiar. Letting go feels risky. The mind believes that vigilance equals safety. If you stay alert, prepared, and reactive, you won't be caught off guard. But constant vigilance is not presence. It is tension disguised as control. There is also a subtle exhaustion that comes from this approach. You may not notice it at first. You just feel tired, impatient, or numb. You tell yourself life is demanding. But the deeper fatigue comes from carrying the weight of trying to manage what cannot be managed from the outside. The most confusing part is that fighting the external often looks productive. You are doing something. You are taking action. You are not passive. So it feels wrong to stop. It feels like giving up. But stopping the fight is not surrender. It is redirection. When you pause and look honestly, you may notice that the same emotional reactions appear even when circumstances improve. Success does not remove insecurity. Agreement does not remove defensiveness. Control does not remove fear. These emotions were never fully dependent on the external situation. The real trigger is closer. It lives in the moment an emotion arises and is immediately justified by the mind. In the moment, attention locks onto a problem and says, "This must be fixed." In the moment, resistance appears and becomes automatic. As long as that moment goes unnoticed, the external world will always seem like the enemy or the obstacle, and you will keep trying to rearrange life to feel different. There is a quiet shift that begins when you stop assuming that change must start out there. You may still take action, speak up, or make decisions, but the energy behind those actions changes. They are no longer fueled by urgency, fear, or the need to escape a feeling. This is uncomfortable at first. Without the familiar fight, there can be a sense of exposure, a sense of not knowing what to do next. The mind prefers movement to stillness, even when movement keeps it trapped. Yet in this pause, something becomes visible. The impulse to control, the urge to correct, the tension that appears before the action. When these are seen, not acted out, not suppressed, the pattern weakens. You begin to sense that the world does not need to be wrestled into submission for you to be at peace. That the struggle itself may be reinforcing the very reality you are trying to escape. As this realization settles, another blind spot starts to come into focus. The belief that you are in control simply because you are making decisions, without noticing how automatic and conditioned many of those decisions actually are. There is a belief that quietly supports almost everything you do. The belief that you are in control. You make choices. You decide what to say. You plan, adjust, and respond. On the surface, this seems obvious, but beneath it lies a blind spot that is far more influential than most people realize. Control feels real because action is visible. You move, speak, decide, and something happens. The sequence creates the impression of authorship. I chose this. I decided that. Yet if you look closely at how many of these choices arise, a different picture begins to appear. Most decisions do not emerge from open awareness. They emerge from habit, from emotional momentum, from patterns that activate before you have time to question them. The choice feels conscious, but the impulse behind it is automatic. A familiar emotion arises, and a familiar response follows. You call this control because you recognize the response as yours. But recognition is not freedom. It is familiarity. The mind is especially skilled at taking ownership after the fact. An impulse appears, an action happens, and the mind explains it. The explanation feels logical and intentional. It creates a story of control. Yet the real driver may have been fear, avoidance, conditioning, or the desire for relief. This is not meant to undermine you. It is meant to clarify something essential. A false sense of control keeps patterns running longer than they need to. As long as you believe you are consciously choosing, you won't question the machinery behind the choice. The danger of this blind spot is subtle. It makes you feel responsible for outcomes you never fully chose. When things go wrong, you blame yourself. When things go right, you cling to strategies and behaviors, afraid to let them go. Control becomes both a shield and a burden. You may notice this most clearly under stress. In difficult moments, choices narrow. Reactions speed up. Old strategies take over. And yet, even here, the feeling of control remains. You might say, I had no choice, while still believing you were deciding. Control also feeds resistance. If you believe you are the one steering, then uncertainty feels like a threat. You tighten, you plan more, you think more. You rehearse outcomes. The mind works harder, convinced that effort equals safety. But effort does not always bring clarity. Often, it brings noise. There is a difference between conscious choice and conditioned response. Conscious choice includes space. It includes the possibility of not acting immediately. Conditioned response feels urgent. It feels necessary. It convinces you that delay is dangerous. The blind spot is mistaking urgency for agency. As long as you do not see this, you remain identified with the controller. You believe that managing life is your job, and that without constant input, things will fall apart. This creates tension, even in moments that appear calm. There is always something to monitor, something to fix, something to anticipate. What begins to loosen this is not giving up responsibility, but questioning immediacy. Not every impulse needs to be followed. Not every thought needs to be acted upon. When you pause, even briefly, you may notice that the urge to control peaks and fades on its own. In that fading, something unexpected appears, a sense of ease. Not because life is resolved, but because you are no longer gripping it so tightly. This is not passivity. It is a different relationship with action. Action that arises from presence feels lighter, more precise. It is not driven by fear of what might happen if you don't act. The false sense of control collapses when you see how often your decisions are reactions to internal pressure. And when it collapses, something more honest takes its place. A willingness to stay with uncertainty, a capacity to observe without immediately intervening. This observation changes the field. You are no longer trapped inside the impulse to fix, manage, or decide. You begin to witness the movement of the mind instead of being moved by it, and in this witnessing, a new possibility opens. What happens when you observe an experience without trying to change it, explain it, or control its outcome? What happens when action is paused long enough for something deeper than habit to respond? There is a moment, often very brief, when something happens inside you and you do not immediately respond. A thought appears, an emotion rises, a sensation moves through the body, and instead of acting on it, explaining it, or pushing it away, you simply notice it. Nothing dramatic happens. And yet, something fundamental shifts. Observation without reaction interrupts the automatic flow that usually carries you. The mind is used to speed. It is used to naming, judging, fixing, or defending. When those habits pause, even for a second, the system loses its usual reference points. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. The mind looks for something to do. It wants to label what is happening. This is bad. This means something. I should respond. When none of that happens, there is a subtle disorientation, a sense of being in open space without instructions. But if you stay there without forcing anything, a different quality emerges. The emotion that felt solid begins to move. The thought that felt urgent starts to lose intensity. The sensation in the body shifts on its own. You realize that what seemed fixed was actually fluid. This is not because you changed it. It is because you stopped feeding it. Reaction gives energy to patterns. Observation removes the fuel. Without judgment, without resistance, without identification, the system begins to self-regulate. This is not a technique. It is a natural function that has been overshadowed by constant interference. When you observe without reacting, you are no longer reinforcing the loop between emotion and interpretation. You are allowing experience to complete itself without adding a story. The present moment becomes wider. There is more room for nuance, for silence, for ambiguity. The mind may protest. It may say you are being passive, that you are avoiding action, that you are losing control. These protests are part of the pattern trying to survive. They are familiar voices, not instructions. What is surprising is how often clarity arises on its own when you do not rush. Insight appears without effort. A more appropriate response becomes obvious, not because you calculated it, but because the noise settled. This kind of observation does not require you to withdraw from life. You can be in a conversation, at work, in the middle of a decision. The difference is internal. You are no longer collapsing into the first impulse. You are allowing a beat of space. In that space, you may notice that many reactions were never necessary. They were habits rehearsed long ago. When they are not enacted, the body relaxes. The mind softens. The sense of identity loosens slightly. You are not the reaction. You are aware of it. This awareness changes how reality feels. Situations that once triggered immediate tension now feel workable. Not easy, but workable. There is a sense that you are meeting life rather than bracing against it. It is important to understand that observation is not suppression. You are not trying to get rid of thoughts or emotions. You are allowing them to be exactly as they are, without interference. Paradoxically, this is what allows them to change. The moment you stop arguing with experience, experience begins to move. This can feel almost unsettling. If patterns dissolve when you do not engage them, then how much of your life has been held in place by your reactions? How much effort has gone into maintaining what you say you want to change? As this becomes clear, you may notice the mind trying to regain control. It may analyze the observation, turn it into a strategy, ask how to do it right. This is just another form of reaction, another attempt to stabilize identity. True observation is simple. It is just being with what is happening, as it is happening, without trying to become someone else in the process. And yet, this simplicity has consequences. When you stop reacting, old circuits lose power. The mind no longer receives the repetition it depends on. Thoughts that once dominated begin to fade faster. Emotional charges discharge without leaving residue. This does not mean the mind disappears. It means it no longer runs the show unchecked. As this becomes more consistent, another phenomenon appears. The mind does not give up quietly. When its usual patterns are not fed, it pushes back. It creates urgency, doubt, distraction. It looks for ways to pull you back into reaction because repetition is how it maintains its structure. Understanding this resistance becomes important because what feels like disturbance or sabotage may actually be a sign that something fundamental is changing. When you stop feeding the same mental circuit, something unexpected happens. The mind does not become calm and grateful. It becomes loud, restless, almost desperate. This is the part few people are prepared for, and because they don't understand it, they often retreat back into old patterns. The mind survives on repetition. It is built to strengthen what is used and weaken what is not. Thoughts, emotions, interpretations, and reactions form pathways. The more they are traveled, the more automatic they become. When you interrupt this flow by observing without reacting, you are not just changing behavior, you are starving a structure, and structures resist being dismantled. At first, the resistance can feel like confusion. You may notice a sense of emptiness, as if something familiar is missing. The old narratives are quieter, but nothing has replaced them yet. The mind does not like gaps. It prefers painful certainty to open silence, so it tries to fill the space. Thoughts may become more dramatic. Old memories may resurface without warning. You may feel an urge to do something, anything, just to restore a sense of normalcy. This is not regression, it is withdrawal. The mind is losing its usual source of energy. What often surprises people is how personal this feels. The mind frames its distress as concern, logic, or responsibility. It says, "You're avoiding something," or "This is dangerous," or "You need to figure this out now." The tone is urgent because urgency has always worked before. But if you look closely, the content is repetitive. The same themes, the same fears, the same questions, circling without resolution. This is the circuit trying to reactivate itself. When you don't respond the way you used to, the circuit weakens. When it weakens, it sends stronger signals. This is why the middle of change can feel worse than the beginning. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because the system is recalibrating. The collapse of the mind is not dramatic in the way people imagine. It does not mean losing intelligence or becoming passive. It means the collapse of false continuity. The story of me that was held together by constant commentary starts to fragment. Moments appear where there is experience without narration, sensation without judgment, awareness without identity attached to it. These moments can feel strangely quiet, even unfamiliar. The mind may label them as boredom or emptiness, but underneath, there is a subtle sense of relief. Without constant repetition, thoughts lose their authority. They still arise, but they do not stick as long. Emotions move through without building into stories. The compulsion to resolve everything weakens. This is often where people panic. The mind equates control with existence. If it is not managing, predicting, or interpreting, it feels threatened. It may say, "If I stop, everything will fall apart." But what usually falls apart is not life. It is the illusion of being the one holding it together. As the circuit collapses, there can be a period of instability. Old coping mechanisms no longer work, and new ones have not formed. This is a sensitive phase, not because something is wrong, but because something is unlearning itself. During this time, observation becomes even more important. Not observation to achieve a result, but observation as presence. Allowing the discomfort without making it a problem. Letting the mind protest without obeying it. This is where freedom actually begins to feel real, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. Not dramatic freedom, quiet freedom. The freedom of not needing to respond to every internal signal. What emerges in the absence of repetition is not nothing, it is responsiveness. A more direct relationship with what is happening without the overlay of old conclusions. You begin to sense that awareness itself is stable, even when thoughts are not. The collapse of the mind's old circuits creates space, and space can feel like uncertainty. But it is also where new understanding can arise, not from effort, but from clarity. As this space opens, a subtle reframe begins to suggest itself. If the mind collapses when patterns are not fed, then perhaps what you have been calling problems are not obstacles at all. Perhaps they are invitations, signals pointing directly to the circuits that are ready to dissolve, if you are willing to see them differently. What if the very things you label as problems are not interruptions to your life, but doorways within it? This question can feel uncomfortable, even offensive, especially when you are dealing with real pain, loss, or confusion. The mind wants problems to be removed, solved, or escaped. It rarely considers that they might be pointing somewhere important. A problem, by definition, is something that creates friction, something that doesn't flow the way you want it to. But friction is also what brings things into focus. It is what forces attention to slow down, to turn inward, to question what was previously automatic. Most of the time, life moves quickly. Habits run unchecked. Reactions repeat without awareness. Then something breaks the rhythm. A conflict, a setback, a feeling you can't ignore. Suddenly the familiar way of being no longer works. And that is exactly why it feels like a problem. When something challenges your identity, your expectations, or your sense of control, it exposes the patterns you usually live inside without noticing. The problem is not just the event, it is the discomfort of seeing what has been hidden. This is why similar problems tend to repeat until they are understood. Not resolved externally, but seen internally. The same emotional themes return with different faces, different relationships, different situations, same inner tension. Life is not punishing you. It is highlighting something that wants to be seen. A problem draws your attention to a place where awareness is needed. It reveals where reaction is still automatic, where old circuits still demand energy, where the mind insists on control or avoidance. Without the problem, these patterns remain invisible. The mind, however, treats problems as enemies. It wants to eliminate them as quickly as possible. In doing so, it often misses the information they carry. It solves the surface issue while leaving the deeper pattern intact. Relief comes briefly, and then the next version appears. When you stop seeing problems as purely negative, a shift begins. You don't have to like them. You don't have to seek them out. But you can relate to them differently. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? You begin to ask, what is this revealing about how I'm perceiving and reacting? This question changes everything. It turns attention away from blame and toward observation. It invites curiosity instead of resistance, and curiosity has a unique quality. It creates space. In that space, you may notice that the intensity of the problem is tied to how strongly you identify with the story around it. The more personal it feels, the more tightly you grip it. The more you resist it, the more it seems to define your reality. But when you allow the problem to be present without immediately trying to fix it, something unexpected happens. The emotional charge begins to shift, not because the situation has changed, but because your relationship to it has. You start to see that the problem is activating a specific pattern, a familiar fear, a familiar need, a familiar conclusion about yourself or the world. And once that pattern is seen clearly, it loses some of its power. This does not mean you stop taking practical action. It means action comes from clarity instead of compulsion. You respond instead of react. And responses tend to be simpler, cleaner, and less exhausting. Over time, this changes how life feels. Challenges still arise, but they no longer carry the same weight. They are not threats to your identity. They are signals, messages pointing to places where awareness is still growing. This perspective also brings humility. You realize that awakening is not a single event. It is a series of small recognitions, often triggered by discomfort. Each problem becomes a teacher, not because it is wise, but because it exposes what is unconscious. As this understanding deepens, a quiet confidence develops. Not the confidence that you can control life, but the confidence that you can meet it without collapsing into old patterns. And with that confidence comes a subtle choice point, a moment where you see the pattern as it arises, the familiar urge to respond the same way, the same emotional pathway lighting up. And for the first time, you recognize that you are standing at the entrance of the pattern, not already trapped inside it. There is a moment that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, yet it changes everything on the inside. It happens quietly. A familiar situation appears. The same emotional signal rises. The body prepares for a response it knows well. And then, something different occurs. You see the pattern, not after it has already taken over, not in hindsight, but right as it begins. In that instant, you recognize the pathway. You know where this feeling usually leads. You know the words you tend to say, the tone you adopt, the thoughts that follow, the emotional ending that always arrives. There is no confusion. There is clarity. This is the moment where reality usually locks into place. But this time, you do not step in. You don't force yourself to act differently. You don't replace the reaction with a better one. You simply don't enter the pattern. You let the impulse be there without completing it. The body feels it. The mind suggests its familiar storyline, and you stay. At first, this can feel almost unbearable. The pattern is incomplete, and the system doesn't like that. There is tension, uncertainty, a sense of hanging in midair. The mind says something must be done, that you are missing your cue, but if you remain present, something extraordinary happens. The pattern loses momentum. Without your participation, it cannot finish forming. The emotion peaks and then softens. The thought repeats, but with less force. The urge to act dissolves into sensation. And in that space, there is no script telling you who you are supposed to be. This is what it means when we say everything breaks. Not your life, not your functioning. What breaks is the inevitability of the old outcome, the belief that things must always end the same way. You realize, not intellectually but experientially, that patterns only exist when they are entered. They are not external forces. They are movements that require your identification to continue. This moment does not feel triumphant. It feels quiet, almost ordinary. But there is a subtle shift in how reality is perceived. The situation that once felt charged now feels open, not resolved but no longer heavy. You may notice that nothing external has changed yet. The person is still there, the circumstance is still present, the uncertainty still exists, but you are not the same inside it. And because of that, the situation cannot unfold the way it used to. This is not about self-control. Self-control is effortful. This is about clarity. When you see a pattern clearly, the compulsion to obey it weakens. Seeing becomes enough. Over time, these moments accumulate. Each time you recognize a pattern and choose not to enter it, the pattern loses strength. It becomes easier to see earlier. It demands less energy. It stops defining your identity. This is how reality begins to change, not through dramatic action, but through non-participation. You stop feeding what you no longer believe in. There is also a deep sense of honesty here. You are no longer pretending that your reactions are necessary or justified. You are not blaming yourself for having them. You are simply not letting them run the show. This changes how you relate to yourself. There is more trust, more patience, more room to be human without being trapped. Eventually, you may notice something else. The space that opens when you don't enter the pattern is not empty. It is alive. There is awareness, responsiveness, and a quiet intelligence that does not rush. From this space, action may still arise. Words may still be spoken. Decisions may still be made. But they come from presence, not repetition. They feel clean, appropriate, complete. This is the true rupture of reality. Not because the world suddenly becomes different, but because the loop that kept recreating the same experience has been broken at its source. And once you have tasted this even once, you cannot unsee it. You begin to recognize how often life offers this moment, how often the entrance to the pattern appears, and how much freedom exists in simply not stepping through. Reality doesn't change because you fight harder, think more, or try to become someone else. It changes when you see what has been happening all along. Life has not been working against you. It has been responding to you, reflecting your attention, your emotions, your habits of reaction, your way of meeting each moment. When you stop repeating the same inner movements, the world has nothing to imitate anymore. The loop weakens. The familiar outcomes lose their grip. Not because you forced a new reality, but because the old one no longer has energy to continue. This is not about perfection or constant awareness. It is about recognition, about seeing yourself in the act of creating experience and choosing presence instead of repetition. Again and again, gently, honestly. If you stayed with this until the end, write this sentence in the comments. I see the pattern and I don't have to enter it. And if this resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. If you want more content like this, that's where the next layer opens.